I think this is
Yeah.
hands down the best show that we've done on Nerd Legion.
If you call yourself a fan of science fiction, you owe it to yourself to watch this show.
Welcome back to Nerd Legion. We're here for another episode that you're not going to watch because you've never even heard of this show, Scavengers Reign, which has been coming out on HBO Max. It's not just HBO now or whatever.
Well, it's not HBO at all
It's not,
anymore.
it's
Now
not
it is.
HBO. It's just
It is
Max. Just
just
Max.com.
Max, I guess. Yeah, just Max. They have stolen the name Max, which makes it sound like an even more scummy late night cable channel than HBO does. I thought HBO was a better name, honestly. Max just sounds like, what is this? Is it a cereal? Is it an energy bar? Is it pornography? Like, what is this? Maybe it's a little bit of everything.
I mean, it's HBO, so it's definitely
HBO.
a little bit of porn, for sure.
A little bit of everything. That's true. Yeah.
But honestly, there was a great prestige to the HBO name, right? A symbol of quality. So to completely, it's not technically HBO still exists as a brand and it's on the platform, but because the new user interface is so garbage, now I have to look at advertisements for a million terrible reality television shows.
You don't want to watch 90 Day Fiance? What are you kidding me? Isn't that gripping television?
That are interspersed with actual quality HBO content and programming, which is honestly probably a lot of the reason why very few people have watched this extremely good show.
Yep. And we luckily have watched this good show. And now we get to talk to you about it. And again, like I was worried at the start when you're like, oh, you haven't watched this show. And I thought you were talking about this show, Nerd Legion. And then I was like, well, that's true. But, but now we have two shows. So hopefully if you watch the show, you end up watching Scavengers Reign. I guess that's a spoiler because we liked it, didn't we?
I think it's the best show that we've watched. I mean, we're coming off of discussing Loki, which I really enjoyed, and I thought the highs were really high, but it felt like it kind of fell apart in certain ways, and they tried to cram too much, too many characters, too many plot arcs, and a lot of it, it wasn't that it was done badly, it was just kind of left unresolved, whereas with Scavengers Reign, we get 12, 20 to 25 minute long episodes that really do an excellent job of fleshing out a very few characters. And ultimately, it's about the setting and the world of Scavengers Reign. So to give you guys who don't know what this show is, it's actually an animated show. And it is about a group of survivors who have crashed onto an alien world with a complete crazy biome called Vesta. And at the beginning of the show, we kind of start in medias res, where we're looking at different pockets of survivors who have crash landed onto this planet. The actual cargo ship with a bunch of people in cryostasis is still in orbit around the planet at the start of this series. And they have been there for several months already by the time the show begins, or weeks at least. They've sort of adapted to the environment in different ways, and we're split up between three different groups of people. A woman who was a cargo specialist named Ozzy, and she has a cargo robot with her named Levi. Sam, who is the captain of the ship, and Ursula, who was one of the botanists aboard, and one of the company guys named Cayman, who is out on his own. So there's three different storylines that are progressing right at the start of the show, and these people have adapted to the environment in their own kind of unique ways, and you kind of see how they are struggling to survive and then ultimately to kind of get back in communication with somebody who could potentially save them or bring the Demeter, the name of the ship, down to the planet in order to get the shuttle that's on board to escape. But this show is really good, guys. It is kind of excellent start to finish. It gives so much time for the characters and the environment to breathe. And the environment is very much the center of this show, which I find to be delightful.
The planet is the main character, really, when it comes down to it. But it's great. And you know what? I had to mention right off the bat, appropriate transition for us to go right from Loki season 2 to this show, because the voice of Ozzy in this show was I'm gonna slay the pronunciation. I'm so sorry. Wunmi Mosaku, who played
Wunmi
B-15, Hunter
Mosaku, yeah.
B-15. Mosaku, who played Hunter B-15 in Loki season 2. So very smooth transition for us to go from that show to this show. She crushed it. I thought generally the voices were very good in this show. I felt like the weakest one was probably Chris, but even
Sure.
that is like a small, nitpick kind of thing. But I don't know. Voice acting is a side sort of interest of mine, and so I pay very close attention to it. But this show, if I had to describe it, I would call it Lost in Space. And I'm not talking about the 1960s show Lost in Space. I'm talking about the 2000s show Lost, but in space, because the format is basically the same. Like, if I could, and it's not a criticism, because there's nothing wrong with taking an established story format and then adopting it to a new setting with new characters. Nothing wrong with that. I like Avatar just as much as Monty does, which is to say, Fern Gully was great. It's the whole Pocahontas. Well, yeah, kind of Pocahontas. Anyway,
Dances
going
with
back
Wolves,
to this,
but yes.
it's Dances with Wolves. It's all that. But Lost in Space is different. This is where, we have a thing crashing and from the sky. We have survivors trying to make it on a mysterious place. And then as this develops, we learn more and more about each character's backstory, which shows them all in a different light than what we saw before and all that. So it really is like the exact same format of Lost, only put on an alien planet. Even to the extent of halfway through, we get a new group of survivors, aka the Tailies from Lost, in this scavenging crew that kind of come visit. So it really is just Lost. It's Lost, but it's on an alien planet. And there's nothing wrong with that. I loved the show. I really enjoyed Scavengers Reign, but it is not an original presentation. We'll put it that way.
No, I don't think it has to be, because the basic premise is very simple. And this show is really not about breaking new ground in terms of its concept. It's about breaking new ground in the way the concept is presented, because I think what makes this show so fucking good and so interesting is that it's the world of Vesta, and the way it's the tone of the world and the aesthetic direction that they give it, and the way that they show this incredibly fascinating, beautiful, deadly environment, and how this is something that people are definitely not evolutionarily supposed to be part of, and indeed is deeply confusing, and they have no idea what they're going to be encountering next, because it's a completely unexplored environment that operates basically on different rules than anything that anybody had seen before. So what appears to be benign is actually quite dangerous. What appears to be dangerous can be quite benign, but you just have no tools for cognitively evaluating the environments that you're in. And I think that's what makes this show so wonderful. And the concept art, and not even the art, the concept of the way the planet works had to be designed so well from the start of the show that it really is just layers and layers and layers deep as you watch this. And part of the pleasure is the slow buildup where you're just looking at the way the characters are interacting with the environment and the beautiful art style. And that is probably more than 50% of the pleasure of this show.
Oh, yeah. The creature design is great. It's very unique. It's very it very much builds on I feel like it's a spiritual successor to animation that we've seen in the past, like Princess Mononoke, with that kind of thing. And like it very much takes that sort of like angle and adopts it to an alien landscape, an alien ecosystem. But what was interesting for me, most interesting for me with this show, is the sort of study of how humans interact with an environment, and how the environment interacts with them. Because essentially the big bad of the series, this alien that just grows huge and has psychic powers and all this kind of stuff, it becomes that way because initially this species seems to have this relatively benign interaction with another smaller species where it, feeds it this stuff. The little animal goes off to get food and bring back to the slightly bigger animal, but this animal is only like around dog size. But then when it starts to get a human to go get food, the human is able to start killing bigger and bigger things, which helps this thing grow much bigger than it was ever intended to in this ecosystem, which causes all sorts of problems. So it's also, you know, a cool study of what happens when you introduce a foreign element into an ecosystem and how does that change it. And I really enjoyed watching that aspect of it unfold. And there's, if you look at the different groups, there's very different ways in which the different groups interact with their environment. You've got Ursula and Sam, who right from the beginning have learned to sort of work within the environment and adopt interactions with the alien life to sort of like make their way through it, whether they're using one as a gas mask or they're using one to float away or something like that. You know, they're very much in tune with the environment and you're working within it. Then
And
you've
that makes
got
sense
oh yeah,
because
mhm,
Ursula is a
she's a
botanist on
botanist.
the
Yeah,
ship,
exactly.
and so
Yeah,
she is much more about studying the life forms and figuring out applications. And there are many, many. I mean, part of the cool part of the show is that there's many applications for the creatures and plants that they find that
right.
are able to be used in surreal ways in order to kind of live in this environment, right? And so, as you say, Sam and Ursula immediately started being much more in tune of using the natural resources to accomplish their goals.
hmm You've got, and then you've got the contrast, right? Which is where Cayman becomes a tool used by the nature there, where he is, you know, kind of co-opted by this psychic alien to, you know, become essentially its food gatherer for it. Then you've got Ozzy, who's more of the typical sort of like human, right? In this, which is all about like dominating nature to her will. She carves out a space with a perimeter. She's using technology to exert force over nature. And so she's
Well,
kind of
she's
the opposite
refusing
of
to
Cayman
adapt
at
to
the
the
beginning.
environment in some ways. She's growing crops
Exactly.
that she brought down from the ship and using the tools
Yeah.
that she had there to create the Earth environment or the human environment on Vesta, the planet.
Yeah. And then you've got her robot, Levi, that eventually just becomes nature. It sort of like becomes a more sentient, more living thing that by the end of the show, we see is starting to procreate, interestingly enough. So when we get to our talk about what season 2 could entail, that'll be fun to talk about. But so what I really loved is that you have very different ways of interacting with the planet for each of the little groups of humans, you know? So that was a really fun thing I thought with this show, and it was unique. I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the art style too is really wonderful. I'm not going to say that
Mm,
the animation is super great in this show because the movement, like, it's clearly not extremely high budget, but the
yeah.
style in which it's done in, now this is clearly derived from 70s sci-fi comics. So the light line work and the kind of the
Mhm.
color and the way detail is expressed is almost entirely derived from a French artist and named Moebius, who people, if you
Oh,
know,
sure.
Jodorowsky, he did the illustration for the graphic novel The Incall that
Meta
Jodorowsky.
Barons.
He didn't do Meta Barons, but yeah, it is
Oh,
a
you didn't?
similar style.
Oh, yeah, never mind. I don't know what I'm
Eh,
talking about apparently.
but a lot of people have seen Moebius's work over the years. It's very, very distinct. Um, he did the Blueberry series of French comic as well, but probably most Western people know him. It does look a lot like The Uncall, but this is very
Mm.
similar to a school of
Oh,
graphic novel illustration from the 70s.
it's got
And
that similar vibe, yeah.
yeah, it's hugely influenced by Moebius. And if you've ever read or seen any of Moebius's illustrations, it's kind of very instantly obvious that that's what this is. And I love it. As somebody who's a big fan of graphic novels from this period and of this art style, I think they absolutely fucking nail it. And it's really satisfying to see this in action because we saw Moebius did he did some of the concept illustrations for things like Alien as well. And obviously he did the film that didn't get made, which was Jodorowsky's Dune. He did a lot of the concept art and stuff for that as well.
Mhm.
But it is very cool to see that kind of come to life in this series, and I think it really does serve its purpose. It does feel otherworldly and very, very alien and foreign.
Yeah, I thought I enjoyed looking at the environment and the aliens more than the people. Um, I to a certain extent, at first I was like, the people are just too simple, like too simply drawn. There's not really the animation isn't great, like the faces aren't great. Um, and as I went on and watched the show, I was like, well, I mean with the body horror stuff that continuously sort of happens to the characters and all that, like having a much more simple animation style for the people specifically, because I do feel like it was simpler for the people specifically,
Yeah.
allows you to have those moments be more impactful, because then there's sort of this like greater level of detail that's interacting with this less detailed aspect of the show. And you can just see things more clearly. I appreciate the level of emotion you can bring out if you draw faces simply versus putting like a ton of detail in them. That's not to say you can't have that same level of emotion in an animated, feature with a higher level of detail. But I thought they worked well with what they had. That was the only thing that kind of like bugged me throughout like the first half of the show, and then I kind of got used to it. Was I felt like the people in the show specifically were drawn a little bit too simply compared to everything else, compared to the environments and the aliens.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that for sure. I think probably that this show was not given the biggest budget in the universe,
Yeah.
Stoa, and so they probably had to pick and choose exactly how they were going to allocate their resources. And frankly, I think it's pretty astonishing they got the level of detail in the creatures and the environment that they did on this budget, because it is also at times you can tell kind of low frame rates. The animation isn't the smoothest, but the fact that this even exists, I think, is a big win, right?
That's what I was thinking when I was watching this. I was like, I can't believe that this got made. Like it's so outside of the norm. It's so outside of the Disney Plus, the Marvel, the Star Wars stuff that we see. It was great. It was very refreshing to see something
Yeah.
like this actually get made. And I would hope the budget would be much bigger for season 2. We got to get a season 2 at this point. Um, you
We'll
know,
we'll talk
oh, go
about the
ahead.
end, like, but I
Sure.
think that with this show too, it is so far outside of it because it's slow by its very
Yeah.
nature. It's a show about exploration and discovery, and that is often a fraught process with a lot of wrong turns and dead ends. And I think it's very effective at showing that, sometimes something exciting can happen very quickly, but there's a lot of time spent where nothing is going on at all,
Mhm.
or they take a wrong turn and it doesn't actually lead to anywhere in particular, or it takes them time to figure out how to solve an environmental problem that they're trying to overcome. And I think that it's very good at discussing the survivalist elements of this, and the stakes are always extraordinarily clear in this show, that it is
Yeah.
life or death, and like they have to be very thoughtful about the way that they're approaching problems, because they just don't know what's behind the next corner and they can't take any unnecessary risks.
That said, there was a lot of people just touching things in this show where I'm just like, you should know better than to just like touch that thing, right? And sometimes it works out just fine. Like when Ursula is going through kind of like the bramble wall kind of thing, and she stops to watch a circle of life diorama with a tiny alien, which is it's a cool sequence. But I'm like, okay, that worked out, but like, would you really touch that? Like, is that really a good idea? So there was a couple things like where I'm like, I get they wanted to really show us this thing, and it was a cool sequence, but it took me out of it a little bit that she would just like walk up and touch that after she's seen so much horror happen from just the most random things on this planet. So that there was a little bit of that
So
from time to time. Like I said, my criticisms are nitpicky, but you
I'm
know,
I'm willing to buy into that for a couple of reasons. First off, I think it's in
okay,
Ursula's character as a scientist to be curious about those kind of things. And
sure.
second off, there are literal psychic aliens controlling like Cayman in this show,
So
right?
you think she was made to touch it, basically?
I'm just saying we have no idea, and
Possible.
part of that is the nature of this show. But people are constantly being compelled by the environment or by the creatures in it to do things, such as Sam when he gets infected by the parasite
Yeah.
is locked literally, in an internal mental battle not to spread the parasite to Ursula, right?
Hmm.
And so that he is trying to exert his will not to like put the seed into Ursula that was put into him.
Yeah.
And so we just don't know. Like there's so many unanswered questions. And that's what's so great about this show is that you do not, you are intentionally supposed to be as confused as the human characters who are encountering this environment for the first time. That is the whole theme and undercurrent of the show. The experience of the show is being confused.
I mean, that's why I said at the beginning too that like the main character of the show is the planet, right? Because
Yes.
that's what drives all the action. That's what moves the characters. Like it is the most intriguing aspect of all of it. Not that the characters were bad; they definitely weren't. But the main spectacle, the main character was the planet. It's yeah. I felt like there was a lot of it. There's some I forget what it's called, but there's some like sort of phenomenon or whatever where when you see something like fit perfectly into something else, it's like a very cathartic sort of soothing
Satisfying.
sensation.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was a lot of that in this show. The way the alien life forms like fit together and stuff. And on the same token, there was a lot of that, if you've got that phobia of like a bunch of like holes with things coming out of them, there was a lot of that too. Like that doesn't bother me, but I know it bothers a lot of people. But there was like it was interesting seeing like that, the very uncomfortable aspects of it, but then also like the very satisfying aspects of it, where it's like this ecosystem was just made to fit together perfectly, and we get to sort of see that. So there was a lot of just kind of pleasing to the eye sequences with that type of thing too. So yeah, I mean, I can't get over like the landscapes especially. Like that was my favorite part.
Amazing.
Like all the alien designs were cool, but just the landscapes were so original and so unique looking. It was just so cool. I would love to have like some of those on my wall. That
Yeah,
was great.
and that those designs come like straight out of Moebius. You know what I mean? Like those are the kind of extraterrestrial illustrations that he would do during that period. So it's very fun to see that
It was
integrated
that.
into the show.
It was almost like Dr. Seuss, but it could kill you kind of
Yeah.
stuff too. It's yeah, there's a lot of that. One criticism I have for the show that I think is a very valid criticism is actually this one of the same criticisms I have for a lot of Marvel shows. Can you guess what it is?
What?
I don't think you'll guess what it is. I don't know if I talked about it before, but so there's a thing where, and you'll see this in Marvel movies and Marvel shows all the time, where or any sort of monster thing, where it's like if the main character and the big bad monster meet before the final conflict, the big bad monster will suddenly cease to do all of its very lethal actions and simply knock the hero across the room or throw them around. That is what happens where you don't want a real conflict. You don't want your hero to really die. Suddenly, the big bad forgets that, in this case, the alien forgets that it can just tear things apart with its mind or break someone's neck. No, now it's just going to run into him and throw them across the room a couple times, for no reason.
To be clear, this is the creature that Cayman has been feeding. So
Yeah,
I call it the
yeah.
Hypnotoad because it's very reminiscent of the Futurama Hypnotoad, where it's like a small amphibian looking creature that mind controls people to do its bidding for them. So the Hypnotoad by this time is enormous and has actually killed people by breaking their necks with its mind
Yeah.
and doing other tricks, and is malevolent. And what I think is great and ambiguous about the show is we don't know whether it is malevolent because it absorbed Cayman, who is like operating from his own like kind of malevolent desires, because Cayman is a real piece of shit. This guy who basically was the reason why this disaster occurred on the ship, because he literally
He caused
Icarused it.
everything.
He literally Icarused it by sending it too close to the sun.
Yeah.
Which the ship is also named Demeter, which is the Roman god of the harvest, right?
We should talk about that too. What meaning do you draw from that? Because I was thinking about it too. Because obviously it's clearly, intentionally named the Demeter. So why do you think that would be? Why would they use the
Or
name of the god of the harvest for this purpose? I want to hear your theories on this.
So I think like if you go back to Greek mythology, there's several reasons why you might use Demeter. So first off, it has definite agricultural connotations, which is obviously like the entire show, right?
Yeah.
And she is a goddess of fertility as well. So it definitely there's an implication that they are trying to get a harvest out of this planet to survive. You know, worshiping Demeter was fundamentally necessary to the survival of an agrarian society, right? And I also think, you know, you do have connections to the underworld as well. There is an implication of waiting for people to come back from the underworld because Demeter's daughter, Persephone, married Hades, and she goes to the underworld for part of the year and then comes back up. So there is kind of, with Demeter floating over the planets, there is an implication that the children of Demeter, who are the people from the craft, are in the underworld, and they are waiting to come back to their mother. I think that's an implication as well.
That's good. I took the kind of opposite take with the harvest, where it was like, I felt like now, you know, Demeter has come, the god of the harvest, to provide for, you know, this planet, to essentially harvest this new resource and make it, you know, what it wants to make with it. Because I didn't really get any sense of malevolence from the planet itself. To me, the planet was just doing what it does, and humans were caught up into that. As far as the Hypnotoad, we could call that call the big bad that, the Hypnotoad and Cayman, it seemed like there was this kind of mixing of minds that happened then, where this alien had never tried to influence something with, you know, as developed a mind as a human being. And so we obviously, Cayman was able to exert some influence back the other direction too.
Yeah.
And that led to sort of
it is corrupted by humanity to some degree. Like, we don't know how much, but yeah.
Well, Cayman just starts killing everything. And then, you know, and then this alien's like, yeah, it's a great idea. Let's go for it, you know? And, but there's all the things with his, you know, his girlfriend and everything, you know, that things fell apart, and she died, of course, on the ship and all that. Which, you know, makes all sorts of psychic strife between Cayman and this alien. So yeah, I kind of took it as the you know, the people were the ones being harvested, right? Which sort of the opposite of, usually humans are going out there and colonizing the planets. You know, if we look at this from a typical science fiction perspective, right? All these human colonies on these different planets, mastering their environments, you know, very, very, you know, akin to the old idea of manifest destiny that existed, you know, a couple hundred years ago or whatever. And, you know, now it's the flip of that, right? Where the humans have come, but the planet's like, nah, I think I can handle this, you know?
Well, it's also that in the Demeter Persephone myth, and this comes into the end, like, it does foreshadow the ending of the show, which is that once Persephone goes to the underworld and eats the pomegranate, the food of the underworld, she can no longer live with the gods in Demeter the entire year. And this is the explanation in Greek mythology of the seasonal cycle. And so basically, at the end, they get trapped on Vesta, at least for the time being, and the Demeter comes back down, and they actually can't return to their original location. So it's almost as though, because they have eaten the fruits of the underworld, in this case, Vesta, they actually are no longer able to live the same kind of lives that they did previously. You know, the experience that they've had.
It's not like they can't leave because of something they did, though. I mean, I guess it's because of something
we don't know that,
does,
to be fair.
Chris steals a shuttle, so I guess that's the reason the rest can't
leave. To be fair, I mean, the planet is massively changing the people that are on there, and what this could set up in season 2 is actually a reason, if they've eaten the fruits of the underworld, that they can't leave. That's like that's in the cards for sure.
That's definitely possible. What do you want to talk about the ending now? Because there's so much to talk about.
we will.
Like, there's so many parts of this. But no,
before we get there, I want to talk about the Cayman arc a little bit, because I think that one thing that this show does, purely from a writing perspective, that's very clever, is because we start in media res with all of the characters. You know, you don't actually know what happened to the Demeter. You have to figure out a way to naturally explain what happened to get them onto this planet, because it's exciting to start when they're in the thick of it. Like, you get to start out with the action right away. But obviously, if you don't start at the beginning of the story, then you have an issue of how do you explain this? And it's exacerbated by the fact that they're all in individual groups. So it's hard because you wouldn't naturally have a dialogue between these characters months in about what had happened, right? They've already had that conversation a million times. It's not naturally like, you know, if we were stuck on a planet for months at a time, and all of a sudden 3 months in, I'm like, hey, let's talk about exactly what happened during that spaceship crash for the 20th time. Like, we're just not going to do that, right? We're much more focused on other things right now. And
or
so,
if you were like in a plane crash or something with separate little groups here and there, and you wanted to kind of tell the backstory, like how would you approach that? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think
flashback.
but flashbacks are really clumsy. And what I love about what they did with this show is that most of what happened on the ship is told through Cayman's perspective. And the way they do it is they have the Hypnotoad forcing him to relive moments of his life through the psychic control that they have, right? It's the Hypnotoad who is mind controlling him and basically imprisoning him within his own delusion to keep him under the heel of the Hypnotoad, right? The Hypnotoad is trying to distract Cayman by torturing him basically of his own crimes of getting this ship, you know, his girlfriend / it's actually his ex-wife, his wife killed.
Oh, yeah, that's
his
right.
ex-wife killed. As well as the guilt that he would feel from causing the ship to undergo this catastrophe and being responsible for the lives of all of these people. And it's basically forcing him to relive these moments so that he's distracted and can't break free from the control of the Hypnotoad, which I thought was just a fucking great idea of how to solve that problem.
They use that to sort of tell the main story of like why they're there.
Yes.
But they just straight up did flashbacks with everybody else, you know, which
Sure.
I thought worked fine because it's, you know, you say flashbacks can be clumsy, and they certainly can be clumsy or feel forced or whatever. But just like the show Lost, what they did a very good job with is putting those flashbacks in at the exact right part of the story to give a very specific insight into a very specific situation. And so in that sense, you're like, okay, now that flashback is very meaningful because either it explains something that I was curious about, or it's explaining something that's about to happen. And so the way that they use flashbacks was very good, because the flashback in itself is not a bad, a bad storytelling device, but it's just difficult to use well. And so
it has to come up. It has to come up naturally too, which is why, I think in Ozzy's storyline, they didn't get into her love interest until it was brought up in a conversation when she meets the people who land on the world to kind of salvage the Demeter, right? Who are basically, space salvagers, who are just looking for a payday. And that it comes up naturally because it's a flashback that occurs as a result of her remembering this or telling the story to a new character that's entered the plot.
Yeah, you got to put it in the right place for the right reason, which the show did a very good job of. Yeah. But
so I think the writing is just really good overall.
I agree.
It's super compelling.
It was interesting going back to the comic book thing just a little bit. Like, I had to actually look up to see if this was a comic book previously.
It feels like a comic, doesn't it? Yeah.
Just the way there was so many things that made me think that. There was the way every episode, started and ended. Just the amount of things that would happen in each episode was about the same amount of things that would happen in one issue of a comic, which in an issue of a comic book, you don't generally get a ton of story in just one issue, right? But you do get a lot of breadth of, dialogue. You can have a lot of conversations, that kind of thing. And so, but the story doesn't move forward a ton in one issue of a comic book. And that felt like it was paced about the same for this show, and then just the shots, like just the way that they constructed the shots, the way they did different things. It felt to me like I was going from panel to panel on a comic book, when I was watching this show.
Yes.
And so I thought that was really interesting because I've never gotten such like a comic book vibe from a show before. I can't remember any show I've ever watched that was like, this looks like a comic book. Was this a comic book?
Yes.
But I think they took a lot of elements of that too, they use a lot of the elements that make issues of a comic book compelling and makes you want to read the next one to push you forward in this series because you definitely wanted to watch the next episode every single time. I actually, full disclosure, I watched this entire series in the last 2 days because I had been putting it off, and I knew we were going to shoot this episode, and now, I usually don't do that. I'm not a binge watcher, but I had to get this done. But man, like it was tough to put down. It was like even when I stopped last night, I was like, couldn't I just stay up till 3 a.m. and watch the whole thing? And I didn't, but like I wanted to.
Yeah, yeah, I think this is really wonderful and really underrated. And
Yeah.
apparently this show came out from an Adult Swim special that the show's creators made several years ago that was then spun out into
Yeah.
the entire show, which I think is a very interesting way to kind of kick this off.
Apparently
They
there's
had
a
made
short
a
film in 2016.
yeah,
Yeah.
Joseph Bennett and Charles Huettner, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly, created this 2016 short film for Adult Swim, and it was just an 8-minute short with no dialogue. That was about the alien creatures, and then they decided to go for a pilot that was picked up by HBO. So I'm super glad this happened, and I mean, real credit to HBO for deciding to move forward with the series because, like you said, Joe, I think it's really risky, but I think the payoff is absolutely immense with this show. It's absolutely immense.
This is what you do, I think, in a world where like Disney Plus exists, and you've got the juggernauts of Marvel and Star Wars, and you've got Paramount Plus with Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. Like, for these, frankly, for these other platforms, I think to survive, you need to take risks. You need to kind of like do these more unique shows. And I think I want to see more of this kind of thing, more of stuff that, you wouldn't see get made otherwise. This is not a mainstream show by any stretch, but it is so good. And it's not good because it's not mainstream. It's just good because it's good, So people should watch this. They need to watch this show. If you're a fan of science fiction, you
Yes.
need to watch this because this is great science fiction.
And it took, it actually started coming out. They were releasing weekly episodes starting in October. And it took me about, I don't know, a month to hear that this show was even going on. And I know we've been teasing that we're going to do this show for a while here on Nerd Legion, but it took some time, but it is absolutely 100% worth your time to go see this. It's not a huge time commitment either. Like I said, 12 episodes, they're all about 25 minutes long.
Yeah.
So it's not, you're not dealing with a massive amount of time, especially when it can be broken into those smaller chunks, but it is incredibly enjoyable and really original science fiction. I think it's very rare that you get the true, that you get to feel like something is really alien or otherworldly in science fiction. And that is the entire tone of this show. You never escape from that. You never escape the feeling that these people are in an environment that they should not be in. And even you feel very uncomfortable in this show a long time. Like the amount of anxiety that this show just kind of arises in you because you realize that we are creatures that have evolved to be in a very specific environment, and it really does a great job of putting you in a different environment that makes you deeply uncomfortable. Like,
I love it. And I've said this on the show before. I really love shows and movies that can make me uncomfortable, and this show made me uncomfortable in the best way the whole way through. Because like when anything in this world touches any of the characters, you're like, is this gonna kill them? Because you never know.
I mean, sometimes it does very good things to them, right?
Sure,
like that's
you never know. It's usually not good, by the way. But like, if a leaf touches you, is nothing going to happen? Are you going to have some psychic revelation, or are you going to like be infected by a parasite? Is it going to be like a disease? Like, is it poisonous? Like, you don't know, And then you've got the other sort of like physical dangers of, is this root just going to crush you? Is this animal just going to eat you? Like, is this animal, does it look scary, but is it actually totally safe and passive? So and you just don't know. And that sort of feeling of being uncomfortable, the feeling of like these people are clearly all experts in their fields, but are stumbling completely blind through this alien landscape. It's just such a great feeling of tension the whole way through.
And if you guys watched Foreplay in the episode we did on Cosmic Horror for Annihilation, this is very similar to that environment, which is the Alex Garland movie where the meteor crashes and starts to like evolve things on Earth into an environment that is very alien and both beautiful and super threatening. It does have a similar vibe if you're familiar with that movie. I think this movie does it, or this series does it even better than that one does, because it's longer, so you can dive into it more, and it's a more kind of completely realized world. So if you liked that vibe, this is like the upgraded version of that, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And it gets to the point, too, and we can talk about the end now, Doa, which is that Levi, the robot, you have this merging of organic and artificial components where when Levi arrives, you know, there's a flower that really isn't explained throughout any course of the series that's constantly kind of blooming on dead things or on people's graves, which is this very beautiful flower. And the flower actually touches Levi and starts to connect with all the circuitry within this robot, and Levi sort of begins to evolve and like merge with the planet to the degree that by the end of the show, first off, Levi is dismantled by the Hypnotoad at one point in time, blown into many pieces. The planet reassembles like a bunch of creatures, like, I don't know, it's kind of Cinderella style from the Disney movie where all the little mice and stuff are like, you know,
like Avatar-esque, in that every organism on this planet is connected to some sort of greater consciousness. It kind of gives you that vibe. Yeah.
Yes,
where the planet
for sure
wanted to reconstruct Levi, you know?
Yeah, and so the mechanism is like the Cinderella thing where all the little creatures are helping out on a larger project. They kind of bring Levi back together. And by the end, Levi is fully conscious. And, you know, Levi also says, I don't know what's going on in terms of the programming, has become more or less one with the global consciousness of Vesta, the planet. And you get a honestly mind-blowingly good animation sequence when Levi is fighting the Hypnotoad, and then you get to see kind of this like whole life cycle of the planet during that process where Levi is returning the Hypnotoad to its original form. And by the end, as you mentioned earlier, Doa, you get to see that Levi is using those same flowers to create mini fully organic Levi. So the robot is actually reproducing, and it's really just a fascinating idea.
Yeah, it's and it also kind of brings back to the whole idea that like the planet is really the one in control, and the planet is like, all right, well, this one, you know, with this one Hypnotoad got way out of control, but we've created this defense to it. You know, we've taken this you know, inorganic life that's come to our planet, and we've co-opted it and changed it in a way that it's able to handle this new threat, this aberration that's kind of emerged. So I thought that was cool. And then the other thing with the ending that you know, that really makes me looking forward to hopefully a season 2. I haven't read if they're going to make it or not, but is that you know, of course, Chris escapes in the shuttle that everyone else.
So Chris is one of the the scavengers that comes, the bad guys, that comes on the
right villain, but really just someone who's, you know, pretty rough and just
an
wants
opportunist.
To survive. So but and then they get picked up by apparently like the Warhammer 40K universe is suddenly like in this, where it's like this giant, this huge ship that looks kind of similar to the Demeter, but it's got the whole front is like stained glass, which is just amazing, and it's clearly some sort of like religious organization or cult or something like that. Yeah, and they come through, and then one of the mini Levi's is on that ship, so who knows what's going to happen with that, right? But just that this exists in their science fiction universe, and I'm a huge Warhammer 40K fan, and so that that vibe where it's like, you know, technocratic religious aspect of it, like I'm very excited about where they're going to take that, because that when I saw that I was like, what? I just sat up in my chair and I was like, because it comes out of nowhere. It comes out of absolute nowhere.
Well, I think that's what's fun though, Doa, is that we don't really have any idea what the broader universe of this setting is, right? Because we only get this, the only things we know is that it's a cargo ship owned by a corporation. Cayman was the agent of the corporation. Sam was the captain. And, you know, we have Ozzy and Ursula who have their jobs on the ship as well. They were transporting cargo. It's not even really clear what this cargo is. And they suffered a disaster and are on Vesta. We have no idea about human civilization within this world. We have none.
Well, like what Chris says when the scavengers come, what she's saying is that like, oh, this will make a big difference for our people when they're
Yeah,
trying to take the
they're part of a
technology from.
colony or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we know there is disparity that exists in this universe. You know, but that's really about it, right? I mean, and now we know there's this some sort of like seemingly sort of like religious entity that exists in this world, right? But what the relationship of that in the greater world is, who knows? When the clerics or whoever they are coming out of the ship, some of them are like shuffling and dragging their feet in their bandage. It looks like they maybe have like leprosy or something like that. And so what is the aspect of that in connection with their whatever organization they're a part of? And will the planet help them, hurt them, make them like a huge threat to the universe? Like, what in the world is going to happen with that?
Well,
That's
I think
super intriguing.
there's also if you guys are familiar with Dune, when you see what happens in the later Dune books when kind of the planet merges with the human aspects, there's a
Mhm.
question of, are these people going to become super powerful as a result of their relationship with Vesta? And when we leave the show, now they have Levi to kind of protect them and be the avatar of the planet, right? And
Yeah,
Levi's with the rest of the survivors, and they've woken up everybody out of cryostasis after bringing the Demeter down to the surface. So they have a real colony, and they have a protective agent that knows the planet now in Levi, and they've gotten accustomed to the planet. And I think one of the most beautiful scenes is at the end, Ursula flipping through her book and just showing a bunch of blank pages because she's actively studying the planet and showing that there
yeah,
are still many, the symbolic ramification is that there are many more things to discover and enjoy about being on this world. And so we don't know what the future is because at the end of the day, everybody got marooned when Chris took the shuttle. Chris has now been scooped up by the stained glass religion ship, and we don't, and
no.
here's the thing, Doa, I don't, if this is the last, if the series ends right here, I still find the ending very satisfying, right?
Oh, totally. I
I
mean,
think
it
it's a
doesn't.
great ending that doesn't even need a season two. If there is a season two, I'd be delighted. But I feel like this was complete. It's a completely told story that can exist
Absolutely.
by itself no matter what.
Well, this is what you need to do in a first season of a show like this is you need to it's fine to include teasers of what could happen in a second season, but you need to have a full conclusion to your story. You can't leave it on a cliffhanger, right? And they did that, right? Where they did it give us a full conclusion to the story arc involving these characters, involving their experience with the planet and all that. Yeah, now they have the colony.
And
Now they're
and there's
learn
a
to live in
sense of
harmony. Yeah.
yeah, there's a sense of ease because of Levi's presence within the show that does make
Yeah.
it satisfying. Like if Levi's not there, you're like, oh my god, these people are just gonna die eventually. But now
Yeah.
there's like hope, I would guess.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
what makes it feel like it feels like it's reached a satisfying conclusion.
There's a certain it's interesting too because there's such a big element of mercy at the end of this show where the whole show has been very unforgiving the entire time where there is zero like lenience for anything because if either this thing is going to kill you or you don't and it kills you, right? There's a certain merciless aspect to nature, right, that has existed through this whole season. So when we get to the end and Cayman doesn't die throughout the show, you're kind of like you kind of want him to get what's coming to him, right? And he does get sort of psychically tortured. He goes through this whole thing where he becomes like a fetus inside Hypnotoad and all that. And then you get to the end and he's clearly affected by his experience, but he's alive and he's well. And
But
you
he's been
don't know
literally
how it.
reborn at that point in time, to
Yeah,
your fetus point,
exactly.
right?
But you don't know what that means. You don't know how that's changed him. But there's a certain level of mercy to it, where it's like you've been through this experience with the planet. It was unforgiving to you because the planet is just unforgiving to everything. But because you've sort of like went through this, you've kind of faced what you've done, and you face the consequences of that. You've been literally reborn, like you're saying. There's you're accepted, and you're maybe not, his character maybe isn't welcomed in the colony, but he's accepted, and there's just this peace that exists where it's like, well, he went through a lot, we all went through a lot, let's just move forward, right? And I like that that's part of it too, where after all this like brutality and and sort of like all this brutality with the planet. At the end, there's sort of this mercy that exists for everyone, right? Levi is merciful to them despite being part of the planet. Could just destroy them all, right? As a interloping entity. And then there's this mercy towards Cayman too from everyone else, where they know what he's done, but he's been through a lot too, and so let's just move forward,
Right. And I think it also shows that Vesta is not a malevolent force. If
Yes.
anything, it's the opposite, as we're seeing through Levi. It just didn't have a method of, there wasn't a mutual understanding about what the dangers were for the people. You get a sense that if Levi is the avatar of the planet, that it is very much trying to work with those people and understand them. Levi is the vector in which the planet and the ecosystem can communicate with the people now. It didn't have a method of doing that before. And it does seem that it's very interested in, maintaining some level of mercy or peace with these people. But it had no method of doing that or no knowledge of how to do that because these things were so new to the ecosystem itself in the terms of the people just suddenly arriving and crash landing there.
And there's almost there's no really good or bad in it, what the planet is on. The planet is just a planet, right? And so, whatever the planet does, it could be seen as mercy with that. But then at the same time, it's more just well, we've dealt with the major threat, which was the big hypnotoad thing. These people are here, let's just find a way to, kind of bring this into what's happening in the planet altogether. So, I feel like the planet is undecided as far as what it's going to do with humanity. But we'll see. I really hope we get a season 2. Hold on. I'm gonna Google it right here. Scavengers.
I don't know if they would have made a decision on that yet, though. It just finished completely coming out.
Anyway. Just so we know, we don't want to be well, I don't know, and then someone's in the comments are oh, they announced this a long time ago.
The last episode came out a month ago or so. From when we're recording.
So from November 23rd, there's rumors that there might be a second season. But
yeah, they clearly left the door open, right?
Yeah. But like you said, if it ends here, I think that's fine. Sometimes it is just good to have these miniseries, these films that are just one-offs, and then you never touch it again. Something great like Willow. That was just a great standalone movie that they never tried to go back and make more of, because that would go so well. So it's a good thing they never did that with Willow. Never mind. That was a bad example. But Big Trouble in Little China. They haven't ruined Big Trouble in Little China yet. No remakes, no sequels, no prequels. Leave Tim Burton alone. Not Tim Burton, Jack Burton, right? Jack Burton. LeVar Burton? No. It was some Burton was the main character in Big Trouble in Little China.
Jack Burton was his name.
It was Jack Burton.
Yeah.
There you go.
Kurt Russell's character.
Yes.
And so anyway, I'm regardless of whether this goes anywhere, I have to say I'm really curious about the creators of this show now and what they're going to do next, because they've been, I think, very bold and interesting in terms of their vision. And so I'm actually super excited for what they could do with even more budget, right? And a bigger project that I think after watching this should absolutely be handed to them, because they crushed this. They crushed this.
Handed to them, but then all the danger is always when you have these bigger budgets given to people like that, sometimes their creative vision doesn't matter very much because it just gets studioed to death. So hopefully we can avoid something like that too. We need trust in filmmakers. We need trust in creatives again, that just that doesn't, it seems like that is sorely lacking in a lot of aspects of art these days, is trust in the creators. Please, they are the reason that you have made it to this point as an industry. So trust their vision. They know better than you, Mr. Bob, business executive.
All right. Well, so final thoughts. I think absolutely everybody should watch this show. I think this is hands down the best show that we've done on Nerd Legion. It wasn't one of the big blockbusters. Many of you probably will, if you've made it this far, congratulations. Watch the show, recommend it to your friends, because we would love to see a season 2 of this one. Probably a lot of people won't even click on this because they don't know what Scavengers Reign is, but you really, really should know. You really should know. This is excellent.
Yeah, if you call yourself a fan of science fiction, you owe it to yourself to watch this show. It is really that good. If you don't have a Max subscription, it's worth the subscription. I don't often shout out streaming services or anything like that. I don't think I've ever done that before, but like, if this is worth it, right? Even if you just turn it on, watch this and turn it off again, it is absolutely worth every penny. So yeah, great
and that
show.
will probably encourage a season 2 as well, because if they see, you know, they've got the data, man. If they see you subscribing and watching this first, they're going to know why you're there. So I really hope we get something more, at least out of these creators, if not a season 2 of Scavengers Reign. The show is an absolute banger. You will
way better than House of the Dragon,
which is coming out. By the way, hilariously, I started getting advertisements for House of the Dragon season 2 summer of next year.
We're gonna have to do it
when I've been watching HBO Max, and yes, we will have to be doing that. So, by the way, guys, next show we're gonna do the first 5 episodes of the Apple TV Plus show Monarch Reign of.
No. I know.
Sorry.
It's tempting
Legacy
to say,
of Monsters. Monarch Legacy of Monsters. Yes.
You've got a choice of 3 right now. Basically,
I know.
It's either Rise of something, Reign of something, or something Legacy of something. In this case, it is Monarchy or Monarch, Legacy of Monsters. We promise we know what the name of the show is.
So it is a kaiju show starring Kurt Russell and also Kurt Russell's sung as young Kurt Russell. So that's fun. The first 5 episodes are out. We'll do it's half the series. We'll do the first 5 episodes next week and wait for the other half of the series to come out before finishing it as we usually do. So we'll see you next week for Monarch on Nerd Legion. See you then.